Well, thank you so much for everyone joining us this afternoon. It is wonderful to see so many smiling, bright faces out there. I'm Lada from ESPN. I cover college football for College Game Day on Saturday mornings. Work pretty closely with some of these gentlemen pretty often. And if you're a college football fan or a college sports fan, you certainly know that it is an interesting time in the sports space. There has never been more going on than there is right now between NIL, the transfer portal, conference moves, CFP expansion. That's just a few of the things that you are seeing being talked about by gentlemen like this, on your local networks, on the national networks like ESPN, and even at your water cooler or at your local watering hole. Today I'm joined by three leaders that are driving the future of college sports as they work to support the athlete and the fan experience. I know they probably need no introduction, but just for fun, let's go ahead and introduce them anyway. In the middle here, we have Greg Sankey. He's the commissioner of the SEC, arguably the most successful conference in college sports in the modern era. Chris Conte is on the end. He's the vice president and the Lois and Richard Folger athletics director of the University of Texas Athletics. And Cole Gahagan, next to me, is the president and CEO of Learfield, the leader in college sports media, technology, and brand building. Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here on this panel.
You bet.
Let's begin with how we got to where we are. And I'll start with you, Commissioner Sankey. How would you describe the current landscape of college sports?
It's a period of evolution. You could use change, you could use revolution, I assume. Words like uncomfortable, but reality are us. I would back up as part of that answer and observe. You can go to any number of higher education commentators and see that one of the contrasts between campuses are these great centers of innovation, yet they're also collectively change resistant. And the slowness of adaptation to the changes around us are part of our reality. And then you look at the last 5 years, you go back to spring or March of 2019, nobody sat around and said, what if there's a pandemic 12 months later that stops everything and causes massive disruption? We were talking about the name, image, and likeness issues and the potential for state legislation, which of any change that's at the top of my list of significant issues in the last 5 years, it's the state engagement in directing athletics decision making, and that's forcing change. It's been slow, but it's real, and we all have a shared responsibility to figure out the path forward. I think in the big picture, you look at the opportunities provided. Having been in Greenville, South Carolina yesterday at our women's basketball championship, when you see things happen between the boundary lines of a game, or 2 weeks ago at our swimming and diving championship in Auburn, you see what's happening in the pool. It's like everything's right in front of you. Everything's correct, proper, and the cynicism and commentary stays away from that moment. But then when it stops, you're back into the commentary and the realities that force the adaptation. So there's plenty of work to do, plenty of opinions, but plenty of what's right between those boundary lines, in my view.
Name, image, likeness is something that a lot of people hear about, might not understand implicitly. Chris, how did name, image, likeness change your job?
Hi, everybody. Softball question. Well, it's interesting. I'll go back to when I was a student athlete. When you signed your scholarship paper, it said, for the right for a free education, the institution is going to have your name, image, and likeness to promote your product. And back in the 80s, there was a poster and a schedule card. And I did everything I could to get on that. I was at the Kappa House that night. I told you I was on the team. The best. I still have that poster. I'm all in on that deal. Like, hey, my wife, can you please bury that poster? Yes, ma'am. But so there was things about name, image, likeness, and it's just the evolution of television, the evolution of social media. It's adapt or die. And I understand the concepts of it. I think what gets lost for me is that in this day and age, we're talking about loan forgiveness at $1.2 trillion. And yet our student athletes are getting a free education, majority of them, without any debt leaving their colleges. So I'm stuck in this really strange time period where I understand why we have to have change, and I'm all for that. And I am all for young people monetizing their name, image, and likeness, and I get it, especially with the advent of social media and the platforms they have. Yet, I go back and say what's getting lost in this whole conversation is that we're educating, outside of the GI Bill, more people across this country are receiving a free education through their talents on the playing fields. And this never gets brought up, and I'm like, guys, do you know what we do for young people? You know, I'm from Taos, New Mexico. I grew up in a children's home. Sport gave me an opportunity to change my paradigm. And yet I look at, we're not even discussing what it did for so many people. Only 2 or 3% of our kids are going to go pro. Yet they're going to be doctors, lawyers, productive people in our community. And so I understand the juxtaposition, but I think the advent of change is here, and I fully embrace it. But I just wish that we had a little bit more dialogue along the line of what an education does for young people.
And Cole, how has your role changed with the introduction of name, image, likeness in its current state?
There are fewer knocks on the door of the Kappa House with posters, that's for sure. There's greater expectations now, I think, amongst the student athletes than there ever had been. I think for very good reason. Our world has changed immeasurably. So when we opened, I think your comment was, these three need no introductions. These two definitely need no introduction. I 100% need an introduction. Our company, Learfield, sort of sits at the center of a lot of what's happening in college athletics from a commercial perspective, whether that's brand licensing, whether that's the monetization of the athletics department with brand partnerships, sponsorships, that kind of thing. So if you think about it, NIL, by definition, is about how those student athletes can benefit by marketing and monetizing their name, image, and their likeness. And so for us, the change has been considerable, and it started from day one. You know, one of the first conversations I had right around that time, July 1, 2021, was with Chris. I was in his office, and we were talking about where we're going from here and what's going to end up happening. And one of the first things that we discussed was how student athletes can use the marks. And when you go back to the first question that you asked the commissioner, how did we get here? My answer is probably going to be more provocative and a little bit more edgy than perhaps the commissioner and Chris can be. Well, it's just, my answer is more about we got here because I think of various lapses in judgment at the highest level of leadership in the NCAA. One of those examples is even when the decree came from the NCAA to its membership body that name, image, and likeness was now permitted for student athletes, there were no parameters wrapped around how those student athletes could go and actually make money in conjunction with the school. And if you look back over, let's call it 90 years of sports marketing in the professional ranks, where you do have precedent in history of professional athletes doing commercial deals, sometimes in the marks of the professional teams, sometimes not. You have a clear delineation of rules of how that's to happen. And if you're, let's just say Clayton Kershaw, who plays for the Dodgers, Clayton does ads for Bridgestone, and when he does that, he's in his jersey. He's in his Dodgers jersey. That's because Bridgestone made the decision to have a partnership with Major League Baseball, have a partnership with the Dodgers, and then go pick a student athlete a pro athlete that they want to work with. And as an example of those lapses of judgment at the highest levels of the NCAA at that time, those parameters weren't in place on July 1 of 2021. And I had to have conversations with Chris Del Conte and Joe Constiglione and Gene Smith and countless others in our space to say, how do we ensure that these opportunities are created for student athletes and are right and fair and hopefully robust, but we don't lose the intellectual property along with it, and we keep the block QT and we keep the Longhorn sacred. And when a brand wants to partner with a student athlete and the university, we can make both of those things happen like we do with Bridgestone. So working with athletics directors, conferences over the last 2 years to ensure we're protecting intellectual property has been priority number one. Priority number two after that is, okay, now, how do we go create more opportunities for student athletes and at the same time, hopefully create more opportunities for the schools as well? And that's probably where our jobs have changed the most in my part of the world, is doing deals for both schools and student athletes.
So there are a lot of people who believe that there needs to be more structure. You're obviously referencing that. Guardrails is another buzzword that you hear a lot when it comes to some of these things. How do you implement that at this point, Greg? I mean, it feels on some level like the toothpaste is out of the tube and it may be very difficult to go backwards.
And if you've ever had the literal toothpaste out of the tube moment in the bathroom, it's a little bit difficult to wipe from the countertop.
I like that.
Take from that what you will with the analogy.
That image is in my head.
Well, it like explodes in your suitcase, right? And there goes the little bag you were carrying, or whatever it touched. Just to expand, now remember in 21, under the Trump administration, there was a DOJ official that wrote a letter really of warning about some of the restrictions that have been contemplated. And in the fall of 2019, you had the first state action, and those state actions that followed, some walled off the ability to use institutional or intellectual property institutional marks. They said we're not going to do that. And then you had states that had no legislation. And so you back up and say, what do you do now? Well, there's learning experiences that suggest you would never have done this on a state-by-state basis, but that's what happened. Right or wrong, that's what happened. That meant that there could be, I think we're in the mid-30s now, different laws, and then a set of no laws, and what's the institutional policy. You would never have done that. And then those state laws, some were fairly well considered, others were not. There were catch-up, some were kind of executive orders without legislative action. I know of no specific oversight activity of an actual state law, so it's not, a position where someone in state government wants to be prosecuting, a large university. So there's not the type of oversight being driven from the people who wrote the laws to make sure that the laws are followed. That produces at least one lawsuit I know with a student athlete from one of our universities over having signed a contract that committed them well beyond what was understood with an NIL entity. So there's no consumer protections, there's no guardrails. How can you have a national standard when you have state attorney generals pursuing NCAA rules on transfers and on some of the third-party activity in recruiting where you're restrained from doing so? You're then to Congress, whether you like that or not. And Congress is challenged right now in the normal business that it must do. And while we've worked to try to resolve the things that we'd like to see resolved at the congressional level, to say that's an uphill climb is the understatement of the day. You then need to figure out other places where you can govern either independently or bring some of those states together to help normalize and set guardrails and consumer protections in place. Because fundamentally, and this I think is in parallel with Cole's observation, when you talk to our student athletes, and for us that's high-level football players, men's and women's basketball players, and a breadth of other sports in a different group, you have consistent themes, which is we deserve better than this patchwork. We deserve better than no consumer protection, no protection for us. We deserve better than a fully unregulated marketplace. We deserve better than lining up across the line of scrimmage or for tip-off or in the starting blocks, not knowing if somebody from a different state follows the same standards. That's what they ask for. And so how can we accomplish that in partnership with some entity that can legally create that structure? That's the I don't know if it's a $64,000, $64 million, or a much greater number question, and that's the continuing work that we're engaged in right now.
I'm just not sure that states would be incentivized to get on the same page as everyone else when they can use it currently
Exactly.
as incentive to bring athletes to their space.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and observe that you've seen a bit more of a race to the bottom of deregulation. And if you really follow that to its logical conclusion, you'll end up with states kind of walling off, and then you'll have state college championships, not national championships. So states are used to high school competition. In fact, I think right now, probably in this city, the state championships are being played in basketball. That's normal. For us, what's normal is cross-state national competition, Final Four, College World Series, and college football playoff. And I still think that is important. And to do that, you need some kind of national standard to make it possible. And then that can feed off of the issue, or that can feed into the issues that Cole identified. So how do you help people manage, whether it's an athletic department, a university in total, or the individuals that are associated with those programs under that type of structure? But it has to be thought through differently than it exists right now.
And to even put a more practical point on all of this, just staying for a second inside this discussion of state versus state, if you will. Forget about school versus school, but state versus state. We're sitting in a state right now that from the moment NIL became possible was automatically at a disadvantage for what could happen for student athletes and monetization, as an example. Specifically, go back to what I was saying a second ago, the ability to create brand sponsorships, brand commercial deals for student athletes while they partner with Texas, Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Houston, any other school in the state of Texas was prohibited starting on July 1, 2021, and was the case for, Chris, at least 2 years probably. And that's one practical example of how, again, from my vantage point, our teams all over the country are in a far better position to create brand opportunities for student athletes when we can say to that local Jiffy Lube or that local Chick-fil-A or that dealership or a national partner, hey, you can root your investment with the school like brands have been doing to the tune of 10 to 15,000 all over the country with us for 50 years. You can root your partnership with the school, but now bring a student athlete in, and the student athlete could be wearing a jersey, they could be wearing a hat, they could be wearing a hoodie. We couldn't do that in the state of Texas for the first couple of years. That's just one practical example of how these things differ state by state and how that can actually be more attractive or less attractive for a student athlete. And to Greg's point, there's a race to the bottom on deregulation to figure out how you can make your state the most liberal when it comes to those things that can be afforded to student athletes to try and win the recruiting battle.
Chris, how has your job changed the most in the last few years?
Well, I think Commissioner Sankey talked about it first in terms of the sanctity of the competition is the same, right? It's the same. And that's the beautiful thing about sport. I just came from watching our team play Oklahoma. Hello. Right? Big win for us. It's exciting. And competition, young people playing against, showing their talents against other teams is awesome. Yet the noise around what they just described is completely changed. But I have 2 teenage daughters, and they're all over the phone. I don't know what's going on with TikTok, the yellow man, the Twitter, all these people on there. They know what's going on, right? And it's been, I watch them, they're up to date on everything. But with NIL, I think you look at it, and I'll take a contrarian view for a moment. Cole, we've always operated under 1/10 theory. The NCAA was our governing body. When you had each state making their own rules and regulations, it's not that we were slow to adapt. We're like, we're creating so much chaos that had never been in the marketplace before. The NCAA gets a bad rap, but I am the NCAA. All of our schools, we make the rules. We do everything we can to try to create this 1/10 theory within that. And all of a sudden now you're gonna have a huge inflection of NIL and these transfer rules and all these things that when you grew up in the business, and not saying I'm bred from Shawshank, but a little bit I am, in terms of, I grew up in the industry, it's all new, right? So you had to come back and take a deep breath and say, okay, what is gonna happen? And how do we do this correctly? And Learfield and Cole have been an incredible partner, because now if you're Coca-Cola and you do a sponsorship with us, instead of just getting a sign in the stadium and a media guy, you can put influencers on there. And you know, it's like the newspaper industry when the internet first hit. You gotta adapt or die, right? And we're adapting, but we're also trying to deal with the national governance. Our state laws are different than Missouri, different than LSU, and our commissioner has to walk a fine line within each state to say, okay, what is happening? Because I'll walk in and say, sir, they can do something in Missouri I can't do, or vice versa. It shouldn't be a race to the bottom. It should be a race to give young people the opportunity to make whatever they want off name, image, and likeness, to have great competition. But we've always operated on one rule. Now we have 30 different states with 30 different rules. That's chaos. And then you have transfer portals. At the end of one football season, you can transfer. At the end of spring ball, you can transfer. And you just have all these different opportunities that I think young people in high school are the ones that are being hurt. because there are opportunities to get into college. Colleges are saying, wait a minute, I gotta make sure and they go get it. They go to the portal, not to the high school kid. Loss is development. Loss is this idea that you get to go to school and change your life 4 or 5 years on campus and really find out who you are. It's become this, you go here, here, and here, and it's just a new world order. And I tell everybody at University of Texas, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. What I do worry about is our industry. What I worry about is young people and what their value is and what they're missing out on through the college experience.
One of the big changes that we've seen is you two now are working together, with Texas now being in the SEC. I remember very vividly watching the two of you have a lengthy conversation at the Red River rivalry, and I thought, those two, they're going to do some stuff. They're going to make some plans. What is it like when the conference that you oversee, Greg, goes out, has new teams coming in? How does all of that work?
Well, he does call me sir frequently when we have phone conversations, so that's a new one to me because I'm going to weave a couple things in here. I was told not to do this, but I'm going to do it again. I used the word dinosaur and looking at myself because to what Chris just observed, you've been through it, you've been a part of affecting change. Now we're at a point where you look back and say, well, could we have changed more quickly? But there was a lot right going on. It wasn't all wrong. And people can agree or disagree, and there are a lot of words, again, from the critics and cynics outside, but I walked with somebody last night at a women's basketball game who played basketball in the 70s at Mississippi State, earned his engineering degree on the men's basketball team, and had nothing but good things to say about the experience.
Sure.
That's not a unique experience for me. And so when I look in the mirror, I want to see the 29-year-old me, but the 59-year-old is staring back. And it puts you in a leadership position where change is happening. And one of the changes that you could see happening, in my opinion, was there was going to be these moments we've seen with conference movement. And how do you think through, how do you prepare for that? I think we've had a bit of a luxury of time versus when Texas A&M and Missouri joined, which was a 10-month, a 9-month ramp up. This has been a few years. And to leave the NIL question, for us, this was a July 21 moment. It happened during media day, which is not exactly when you want the story to leak when you're at the podium, personally, but it happened. And 4 or 5 weeks later, we had you and Joe on a Zoom call. We were talking about our plans for scheduling adjustments and how we're going to gather information. And in many ways, it's been pretty natural. I think the first time Chris and Joe were in with our other 14 athletics directors was January of 22. And I don't think we missed a beat. You know, we're going to have input, and we've got bylaws that say when people vote, but they're a part of the conference, and it's rapidly approaching. And I think when you saw last year, in June, we announced the matchups for our football games. We had an incredible reaction to that. You know, we had this 2-week gap where we made a decision at our spring meetings to play only 8 games. And so there was like 2 weeks, how can they stay at 8 games? And then when you saw the 8 games, everybody said, holy smoke, nobody plays schedules like that. And this is going to be exciting to see the University of Georgia team here during F1 weekend. There's one place on the globe that happens, and that's in the Southeastern Conference between the University of Georgia and the University of Texas. I think that's a magnificent opportunity for us all. And then, as it relates back to kind of the practicalities, you've got 2 more people with thoughts in another state in Oklahoma that adds to a layer of complexity. But I think the will is pretty consistent that, you know, they're going to go out and compete under whatever parameters exist now, but there's a universal agreement that this situation doesn't work, that it's not effective, that it creates risks for young people. Those stories are not being told fully, in my view. Where promises are made and not kept, you have collectives that have made commitments and then shut down. Some of those have been public without fulfilling those. You know, the limitations we have legally are real. We just don't get to ignore those. That's why we have to be intelligent in how we communicate, but intelligent in how we address those things, and there are 16 of us working on that right now. But it's not easy. It's the most complicated situation I've encountered, and I've had a few in 9 years, in every high-level law firm outside of our footprint. So forget people that may have law degrees from our campuses observe this is the most complex legal situation they've ever encountered. And these are people that deal with the highest level of employment, labor, organizational, antitrust law.
To stick with the expansion for just a moment, is expansion as simple as the motto you mentioned earlier, adapt or die? Do you have to expand at this point in order to adapt accordingly?
I don't think we have to. Others have talked about numbers. We could have expanded last summer, and we watched. I think we, as a group, made collective decisions, and University of Texas, University of Oklahoma made decisions that put us in a really, really strong position of leadership, of a really strong competitive position, of working to build our financial position. We work all the time internally to build our relational position. That's not something that's seen outwardly, but how do we work together effectively? That's one of the challenges when you do add, and when you have the kind of turnover we've experienced at the presidential, the chancellor, and the athletic director level, which is part of our new modern dynamic. So if you ask about things that are different, I talked about state laws. A second that's very different, my predecessor served for 13 years, I'm in year 9, and yet I've had more presidents, chancellors, and athletics directors. Actually, it was about 7 years in than he experienced in 13, so the rapid pace of personnel change and institutional memory loss there is real. So no, it's not as easy as simply saying we want to be at a number, or the old way of thinking that you did certain things for certain reasons apply. TV demographics are changing. The media industry, which has been a part of the revenue flow, is changing rapidly. And I think there's another level of thinking that goes into these decisions now. And again, for us, we certainly had opportunities to add, but it didn't really fit with who we see ourselves. And I've used the phrase, and it's not an insult to others because they've used, we don't have to be in 4 time zones to be a national conference. By our existence at 16, we are a national conference because we attract people in. And in fact, somebody sent me a sweatshirt from a podcast I did in England, so we're an international conference as well.
It had to be the right fit. You weren't just going out looking for partners, essentially.
Oh, sure. When it was the opportunity to go to 16 with Oklahoma and Texas, that was not the first time that I'd ever had a conversation like that.
So we weren't just throwing a dartboard or throwing a dart at a dartboard going, whoever it lands on, that's who's joining the SEC.
Right.
That feels reckless.
In the moment, it created some difficulties, as you can imagine, the in-state expansion. And I've publicly acknowledged and owned that reality. But if you go back in our history, there have been in-state offers for membership made decades ago that weren't accepted. So that's not novel for us. But I think now on the precipice of the move to 16 being official, and then looking at what happened after we made that decision, we clearly made the right decision. And when I took over, remember, I was an associate commissioner, so my recent career path, I lived in Texas, I was the Southeastern Conference commissioner, so I drove along I-35 to places like San Marcos and UT San Antonio, never imagining I'd be in this position. But I studied a lot about what happens in college sports and understood the people and the decision making. I moved to the SEC, I was an associate commissioner, nobody really cared who I was. I was an internal hire. And when I was hired internally, one of the questions was, did I have the gravitas to lead the Southeastern Conference? I mean, I had presidents who came to me and asked me that question individually and in an interview session. Do you have the stature to lead? That's not why we expanded. That's about all that leads up to those types of decisions, so you're prepared for that moment.
He's gonna get mad at me for saying this. He's gonna get mad at me for saying this, but it doesn't get touched on enough, it doesn't get reported enough, talked about enough, that everything that Greg just described is so insanely commendable when you think about the fact that there's nothing that the SEC has done that's been predatory. There's nothing that the SEC has done to go out and attract schools, when in reality, there's probably media incrementality out there. There's probably an opportunity, if you just go off of the economics, for Greg and the SEC to go work with other schools and potentially build upon 16 to 18 to 20 and beyond that. And what he's touching on that doesn't get talked about enough is that decision-making prudence is not always just about what the numbers tell you, what the economics tell you. There's so much more in what good and healthy balance means to a conference, and not just the SEC, around the country as well, that is what makes that conference successful, and several others successful too. But it doesn't get touched on enough. That
You want a funny story in the middle of this? So at my press conference, and I was hired, so we're way off the NIL business. You know, you prepare for press conferences, right? You think about questions that may be asked. And I knew that one of the questions I would be asked would be about expansion, like the E word. So this is March of 2015. There had been some movement in the years prior. Our expansion commenced in 2012, moving forward. And so when I was asked, I had prepared a line that my job is to focus on leading with excellence, because excellence is attractive. That was literally written out. Excellence is attractive. And in the moment of thinking through how that would play in the media, like if I say excellence is attractive, this is like the split second thinking. I'm like, somebody's gonna write, oh, he's out there looking. Excellence is attractive. And so my quote was, I pivoted to say, my job is to lead with excellence, and excellence is good. So the next morning, I'm looking at the ticker on ESPN. I'm eating breakfast in a restaurant with my family, and it says, Greg Sankey, excellence is good. I'm like, wow. But that's a bit of the sensitivity from my perspective, that in this role, it's not like everybody actually listens, but people pay attention, and you can move markets, if you will. You can move some minds if you're not careful with what you said.
Yeah, and you're conscious
So
of the perception.
I've tried to be.
Cole, has expansion changed your job at all as there are teams moving conferences?
I don't know if it changed my job necessarily. It's definitely changed my life, because every dinner I go to, every function I attend, somebody will grab me and say, who's going where and next, and what's going to happen? And I have absolutely no clue what the answer to that is.
But they think you.
Yeah, and for the most part, very few of us do. It really hasn't. I mean, for us, we've had a lot of movement over the last couple of years. But prior to that, we had a good bit of data. We being our company, Learfield, but we had a good bit of data around what these conference changes meant. We'd seen Missouri change. We'd seen Nebraska change. We'd seen Colorado change. We'd seen enough. We'd seen Texas A&M. We'd seen enough to know, okay, does movement result in a lift to the business, if you will? Remember, we've got a good pulse across licensing, so every product that sells out there, hoodie, hat, jerseys, we have a good sense for what that business looks like. Commercial business, what the traffic to the site looks like, because we own an operation that runs most of the athletic sites. So we've got a pretty good pulse on what happens. And stop me if this is going to shock anybody out there, but the biggest thing that contributes to the lift of business, or perhaps sometimes a little bit of a downturn.
Is it excellence?
It's good. Excellent. Excellence being
put a
good.
T-shirt
It's the one
together,
that's like,
sell that on
I had no idea. I had no idea he had phenomenal Forrest Gump like quotes going on. But it's wins on the court, ice field, and sometimes unfortunately losses that'll have the biggest impact on the business. So we haven't really seen anything that is too significant in conference changes. We've seen a couple of coach hires that had an impact on the business, for sure. Not in the SEC last year as much as perhaps another conference out in the West. But we've seen other factors that can have a dial turn impact on the business pretty quickly. Not so much the conference changes yet.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Have you seen a lift in women's sports? It seems like there's a lot of attention certainly on women's basketball with what Caitlin Clark is doing at Iowa. But I keep seeing, people talk about how everyone is watching women's sports, and sometimes that seems to get lost in the whole name, image, likeness thing, Chris.
One of the biggest women's sports out there, volleyball.
I think that, just a couple of things real quick on conference for a moment. I think one of the things that you looked at years ago, on a P&L, I have two revenue streams. I have football and men's basketball that make a positive revenue, that fund our entire athletic program. When we looked at the opportunity 4 or 5 years ago, they did away with the tax deduction for athletic giving for priority seating. That was a critical component of how we fund our entire athletic program. One of the things you look at, the greatest things that ever happened in college athletics is Title IX, opportunity for women. At the same time, it capped their scholarship limits on men's football from unlimited to 25 a year or 85 total. That created parity with the rise of ESPN and television at the right time. All of a sudden, you had teams that were, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and early 70s, we would have 150 on scholarship as a freshman class. Now we're only recruiting 25. All those players went everywhere else, created parity. The excitement, the advent of television, all of a sudden you had Miami, Florida State, you had Utah, Oregon, untraditional powers that came out of nowhere because of parity. And in 1983, there was a lawsuit by Oklahoma and Georgia to sue for more access. These things have created an abundance of opportunity for everybody. And I think that now we're just getting a chance to see the greatness of women's athletics as we celebrated Title IX 2 years ago, 50 years. It's been there. And we have great student athletes. And for us, our opportunities looking at, they did away the deduction. We knew who we played. And we wanted to make sure that we had great quality opponents at home to maintain an incredible athletic program. And when we approached Commissioner Sankey with this opportunity, we knew conference has happened. Texas was in the Southern Intercollegiate Athletics Conference at the turn of the century. Then we went to Independent and Southwest Conference. You can look at Chicago was in the Big Ten, Tulane was in the SEC. Conference moves are not new. But what I really wanted to have happen was for us to be in what I feel the premier conference with a premier leader that understood the landscape. One of the things I really pride myself on is 2 or 3 steps ahead of trying to figure out what happens in the landscape and how can we make sure that I protect our entity, which is the University of Texas. The rise of women's sport and the popularity of it today, whether it be volleyball, women's basketball, softball, it is unbelievable. But it's also because the platforms have changed. Young women have got a chance to watch and grow up in sport. And I think you're just seeing the evolution of it. And it is spectacular. And our women's volleyball team's back-to-back national championships. We've won the Directors' Cup for the best athletic program in the country in the playing fields for the last 2 years. 2 out of 3. Last year we were the best women's athletic program in the country, and our women are competing at the highest level. And guess what? We have a chance in the Olympic Games to send 10 athletes there, 10, 15 hopefully. It's going to be awesome, right? And then name, image, likeness on this deal. They all got 1,000 followers, or not 1,000, like millions of followers. It's ridiculous. Like, I mean, the opportunities for them. What's the I don't know, the underarm deal, Dove or something like that. Sure, maybe. They're partnering with our student athletes, and it's so cool to see. We have a track athlete that has 1 million followers. He gets all kinds of stuff for free. It's ridiculous, right? But he's a social media influencer, which I don't know what that is, but he's pretty, by the way. That's all I know. That guy, no problems across campus. So that guy's a track athlete, and he's like our highest earner on name, image, and likeness. Right, and it's just it's an awesome time to see it. I mean, it's a really great time to just kind of watch and see what's actually transpiring. The difference is that we have different state laws across the board. That's what's the frustrating part. Name, image, and likeness is exciting. It is awesome for the kids. But what happens when you have one state different than another and this and that, that's the chaos because it affects coaches, it affects recruitment, it affects everything that you know. And if we had some type of a national law would just get rid of the headache and just let them play sports and really learn and monetize themselves. And now it's just a little bit of chaos. The advent of women's athletics, the popularity of it, South Carolina, both women, they went undefeated 2 years in a row. Don has done an amazing job. We got Uncle Vic on our side who's doing a great job. It's just and the fans are showing up in droves. We packed the house for both men's and women's basketball and volleyball and softball. It's just Longhorn Nation they're into it.
Cole, I imagine you've had opportunities that with the increase in attention on women and all of the elements that you mentioned contributing to where we are right now, where you can connect businesses
with
some of those athletes?
It's
Not
been
quick enough, by the way.
Yeah, he's going to tell me not enough. One breath, he said we're doing okay, but then now he's not enough. It's been extraordinary, honestly. And again, we're not talking enough, a little bit to Chris's original point about what student athletes get in both the historical environment and college athletics, and even still in this environment today, what they get, these opportunities on these campuses. Likewise, we're not talking enough about how the intersection of these two things that you just brought up, women's sports and the popularity of certain women's sports, and now NIL opportunities, the intersection of those two things is great for women's sports in general. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Just look at what the Kavner twins have done in increasing visibility into women's basketball. Just look what Caitlin Clark has done in the increase in visibility in women's basketball. About 2 years ago, we started our own media apparatus at the company called Learfield Studios. Over those 2 years, we've produced over 6,000 units of video content. The overwhelming majority in those 2 years of the content that we've been creating, it's shoulder programming, it's the kind of things that Chris was touching on, that his two daughters, the Yellow Man and Insta and everywhere else, it's the kind of thing that my children at 16 and 13, they're watching programming that is bite-sized, it's nuggets, it's on the platforms that they're on every single day. That's the kind of stuff that we're creating. And we created a series, a short form series around the crossover at Kinnick is what we called it, which was the game that Iowa played in Kinnick Stadium. And the impressions, over 50 million that we got for that event was almost, I love our Learfield Studios team, and they're outstanding, and I want to say it was because of you guys. It was 100% because of Caitlin and what she drives in eyeballs and attention. And it is the most successful program, the most successful nugget of content that we've created. And we've created content with Texas and Michigan and a host of other, Alabama, a host of big schools, and it was driven by the popularity of Caitlin Clark. So I think that the combination of these two things, women's sports are doing well. Obviously, Iowa went to the national championship last year, fell a little bit short, but a lot of eyeballs were on that team and were on Caitlin. The attention that are on these programs, not just Caitlin. I mentioned when you referenced Chris to begin with, if you've not been to a Texas women's volleyball game before, you are missing out on something extraordinary in life. It spans basketball, volleyball, women's golf. There's so many events right now that are exciting. And then when you pair that with the fact that they can now be seen through a commercial lens and they couldn't before, I think it has a very positive, explosive potential impact on the growth of women's sports.
What would you say, Cole, to people who read the headlines, see the stories about college sports, and they talk about the expansion of the playoff, and they talk about conference realignment, and they talk about NIL, and they talk about the transfer portal, and think that sports right now are in crisis?
It's not right. I would say that it's, first of all, it's human nature to talk about, especially when you're a fan. It's human nature to talk about all the things that are not working as opposed to the things that are working and are successful. So I think that's same human nature is probably to some degree what's blanketing college athletics with those types of comments and that sentiment in general. What I tell people all the time, and most importantly, what we talk about inside of our own walls, so that hopefully our team of 2,200 strong around the country, they take the passion into what they have to do every single day. What we talk about is there has never been a time, inarguably, there has never been a time in the history of sports in the U.S. I have not spent enough time in cricket and EPL and rugby everywhere else around the globe, but at least in the U.S., there has never been a time in the history of U.S. sports where more attention is being paid, more eyeballs are on the sport of college right now, college athletics on the whole, not just college football. Be clear about that, not just college football. There's never been a time when this much attention, this much fervor, this much excitement, this much curiosity has been targeted to college athletics in the history of the business that the three of us are in. That translates to wins for everybody. Greg's seen it on the deal that they've done. Their rights continue to improve, which is great. Same for all the other conferences that are out there. And we see a little bit of a trickle-down effect to the schools as well. It's great for all of us. Now, we've got to get it right in the years ahead. To Greg's earlier point, there are still big strides we have to make in order to bring order to some degree to what's a little bit chaotic, but it's not right now. I don't view it one bit detrimental to the space of college athletics. I view it entirely as a good thing that we have a responsibility to continue to get right and improve on in the years ahead.
And I know you guys take that very seriously, this idea of being at the forefront of making sure that things are being done. that serve the student athletes, that serve the fan bases, that serve the people that are championing what you guys are trying to do?
One of my favorite experiences was being on one of our campuses on a Monday evening and encountering an NFL player, an active roster player a few years ago. And it played on Sunday, Monday's an off day. And I said, well, why are you here? And he said, well, this is home. There's nothing wrong with that. This is pre-NIL. You go beyond that to your questions about women's athletics, and I've said this repeatedly since the expansion announcement. The impact on our women's athletics is phenomenal, is elite. Now, we all talk about football, and that's understandable, but you start to total the opportunities for national champions in our 16-team configuration based on the history of Oklahoma and Texas and the history of our 14 institutions. And gymnastics, softball, volleyball have the chance to be even more competitive in many ways than football. And how do we continue to support those opportunities? And that gets to the observation that Chris made. There have been 2 sports that have provided the breadth of funding across our programs, where the expectation is those are self-funded programs. And if you change, for instance, radically the economics of college sports, which is happening, you change the economics of the Olympic movement. And one of the misses is there is no federal program, there is no Ministry of Olympic Sport in this country. We stand unique in using our collegiate environments as the developmental and the support system for the Olympic movement. Sure, there's Colorado Springs, there's Lake Placid, Birmingham as an Olympic training site, there are some others, but those are drawing people in that have been developed on college campuses in track and field, and swimming and diving, and volleyball, and then there's some longer-term sports, basketball, both men and women. And you then think past our campuses and past conference standings to the geopolitical implications. Those are real. And so that brings us back to solutions as you try to communicate about the reality. I think those of us who've been in it long enough have been pushed well outside our comfort zone to say the adaptation's here, it's real, it's needed. We want to be a part of leading that effort, but we have to have a framework that allows that leadership. That's evolution, that's change. And there can be plenty of commentary about chaos and disorder. That's part of our existence. And I'd argue if we took a step back and put college athletics over here and started looking at other parts of society, we are more orderly in many ways than many other parts of society are right now, both domestically and internationally. But that shouldn't mean we rest. I think we've found a sweet spot. We have work to do.
Chris, what would you like to see prioritized going forward?
Well, I'd like to see at least have one standard. I think the idea of having 30 different state laws, it creates chaos for everybody. And I think we've always operated under one standard. And if we could somehow get back to that, it's not a race to the bottom. Everyone's worried about missing out. They're not missing out. We're creating this chaos because they think we're missing out. If we had one standard, I think it would make it so much easier for everyone to understand what the system is. I think what Cole just described, it is an exciting time in the industry. It is awesome. Yet the chaos has started because we don't have a common standard. And that's where I think Commissioner Sankey and the leaders are trying to figure out how we have Congress or whatever it may be to try to get just a common standard. If one law is different than the other, you know, that creates paranoia. We're going to miss out because this. It's not really what's happening. The court system said this is what you can do. Yet all of a sudden this state goes one way, or this state or this lawsuit comes here and you're like, guys, let the system calm down, get ourselves a standard that we can move all through. And I think we'll all enjoy this great phenomenon that's happening right now. I think secondly is that at our place, we have 550, 600 student athletes. The amount of support staff we have now for student athletes is incredible. Academic support, we have mental health professionals, we have doctors. I mean, it's just amazing the support we have around our student athletes. For them to have a great success on college campuses. Yet It'll come down to this coach coming in saying, well, this is what's happening here, this kid's coming in, we don't have the same this or that, and it has just created this uneasiness. And as soon as we can get ourselves out of this period of time, I think you're gonna see the industry just flourish even more.
I was wondering about what you're hearing from boosters and fans about the state of college sports. Does it feel like everybody is just excited? I mean, there was an article I was reading, I think it was yesterday, talking about the college football playoff is likely to expand to 14 teams. We haven't even gotten to 12 yet, right? Like, we haven't even done 12, but we're talking about 14. Is there an excitement there? Is there a frustration? Is there a fatigue? What's the general sentiment you're hearing from fans?
Well, one is because the commissioner invited us to join this league. It's beyond excitement. I mean, Drew and his team we're sold out. This can be incredible in every one of our sports. It is just at a fever pitch. It's really not about the playoff for a moment. It's about who we get to play. I mean, we have Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, and Mississippi State rolling at DKR Memorial Stadium. That's going to be awesome. We go to the big house. The fans are just unbelievably jacked up about those offers. We got a chance to go to Alabama this year. It was electric. They're singing Dixieland Delight. I look over Drew, we gotta get a song like that. This place is crazy, you know, and my good friend Greg Byrne has lights going on, fireworks everywhere. I'm like, hey, we need I'm a big fan of R&D, rip off and duplicate, take notes.
So he's calling me the next day going, I need lights that flash, I need a song.
Yeah.
And you guys come
I'm
up with all
not a big
these.
fan of the flashing lights. But we did it all, and then Drew comes back out, well, we got drone shows going on, orange smoke, and the whole thing's crazy. So I think they're super excited about this opportunity, and it just tells you, college sports is about our colors, our mascot, our fight song, our culture against your colors, your fight song, your mascot in competition. And it is really exciting. I mean, I think the idea of going to a 12-team playoff is, we're excited about that. We had a chance this year to be in the playoff. We lost, an incredible game. It was opposite atmosphere, but I think when Cole just described it, it is because we have a thoughtful leader in Commissioner Sankey that goes about making sure that we preserve what's right in college athletics. And you're seeing that now. And I'm just so excited for the year to come. We're a proud member of the Big 12 until July 1. We're continuing to focus on the conference we're in, but I think it is palpable what the excitement for next year. And that is really a cool time to be a part of it.
When you asked him what he wanted to prioritize, I had a good bet in my mind. He was going to say more runways in Tuscaloosa's airport, because to his point about the excitement, the three of us were down on we're together before the game, and we had, I don't remember what it was, Chris, but we had 200 something planes that were circling Tuscaloosa 15 minutes before the game, including, if memory serves, Texas's plane that we had to get landed because of all of the traffic into, what's that?
That was a disaster. So I'll tell you one story about that. At one time I get a phone call, there's 52 planes leaving Austin, Texas, and they have nowhere to land. So I'm sitting there just minding my own business, and the commissioner, all of a sudden the phone rings, Conte is blowing me up. Where are you at? I'm surfing, I gotta land. I can't help you, I don't know what to do. I find Greg Byrne, he goes, hey, you're not gonna believe this. He goes, hold on, just let him get to Birmingham and I'll send a cop car to pick him up. Well, it wasn't an escort, he's in the back seat of a cop car. The lights going on with the cars there, and he's like taking pictures, isn't this great? I'm like, no, it's not. Flying down the freeways. I mean, when the slogan he says, it just means more, that's what it is. It just means more to people's passion in the South and what they do. And it's not about, it's about the passion of the fan base. And that game, Greg had put all our seats up top, way up in the corner. And we knew that they're normally on the bottom corner. So a man, Drew, goes, hey, we need to get those seats. Don't worry, it's figured out. We ended up buying a boatload of those seats in the lower bowl that he tried to put that he normally do. He walks out and goes, what is that? Just walked away, and it's all burnt orange in the bottom. I mean, he has a great room of ADs, great from the presidents, but it really starts with our commissioner. One of the things he always talks about in our league is, and by the way, I'm in the meeting, but I'm a pledge. I don't get the no vote. They vote on, but I'm like, he's trying to bribe the guy, say this, just in case, vote this way. But the idea of what it just means more is really the passion for the families. And an expansion of playoff, whatever goes on within that conference, it is just an exciting time.
We have only a few moments left, but I wanted to touch on this before we let you guys go. What is the very best part of your job and working with the gentleman you're sitting next to and being involved with collegiate athletics?
I have to go first on this question?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. This is a tough one. The very best thing about my job is, interestingly, cuts back to all the questions you've asked today. We can all hope to have an opportunity to be in an industry that has this much excitement associated with it, that is undergoing this much change and needs leadership in order to get to the right place. If you're in a position that I am super blessed to be in, these gentlemen are fortunate to be in, that's all you can ask for as a leader and as an operator. Greg is an operator of the conference, and Chris is an operator of Texas athletics. It's all you can ask for. And so the neatest thing that I feel like I get to do every single day is to not just be in arguably the most exciting industry and space that you can be in, not just sports and entertainment, but college sports. We get to write the history books for the next decade. And that's pretty thrilling if you like to be active and you like to go and do big, hard things. So that's the favorite. I think that's right now my favorite part of what I get to do every day.
I had experience when I was in college. I was actually in Longview, Texas as a freshman, where my baseball coach, I was not on any scheduled posters, knocked on the door and needed to teach me a lesson about leadership. And there was that moment when I was a kid growing up about 30 miles from Syracuse, New York in the mid-'70s. A guy named Roy Danforth, who was the last guy not named Jim Boeheim that coached Syracuse, led him to the Final Four. John Wooden's last Final Four. I was listening as a 10 and 11-year-old to radio. Made this association between competitive sport and education and benefit. And so that's why I do what I do. I'm not been someone thinking about the professional ranks. And then for me, the special moments are actually when I have individual conversations or group conversations with the young people in our programs. The depth of curiosity and knowledge and understanding goes beyond what anybody sees in the interviews on TV and newspapers. Those are just really encouraging moments. Those put, a little bit of wind in your sails during a tough time.
I think this gets lost here as young people. That's the best. I eat lunch every day with every team. It's awesome. You get to just go down and you get to see them excel when they win, and to see how excited they are about that opportunity. When they come by and say, I aced that exam, they know how hard it is for them to pass that class or that exam. The idea of the industry, the chaos around it is up here. The gravitas is the good sticky stuff. It's like love, right? When you and your wife, my wife and I would brawl all the time in some craziness, but at the end of the day, the sticky stuff that makes us love each other is that we understand each other, we have common goals, and it's just such I think our student athletes are, they're special. And watching as a wide-eyed freshman leave as a senior with a diploma and what they're gonna go and do and see them achieve their goals, and sometimes seeing not achieve their goals and see them pivot. Everyone thinks they're gonna be in the NFL, or everyone thinks they're gonna play in the NBA or whatever professional, or be an Olympian. And all of a sudden they have this pivot, and they go, you know what, I accomplished that goal, this is next. And to see them pick themselves up and be prepared for life because there are opportunities on the 40 acres, it's just, that's what's magical. That's the glue and the sticky stuff that gives me great energy every day.
All right, let's just take a moment and thank these gentlemen for spending the afternoon with us. Chris, Greg, Cole, thank you for the insight, thank you for the perspective, very valuable. We could sit here all afternoon, but I think they're kicking us out.
Thank you.
Thank you.